All right, we'll get started. The board will participate in 5 meetings today. We will start the day with a legislative update workshop, followed by 3 closed sessions and our regular board meeting at 5 p.m. The attorney-client session will open and close in the public, but the session is closed. I'd like to remind all who will be speaking today that this meeting is being transcribed in real time so it can be viewed with closed captioning. Please speak at a reasonable pace so the transcribers can fully capture what you are saying. We will now call the legislative update workshop to order. Mrs. Bass, please take the roll.
District 1, Barbara McQuinn. Here. District 2, Chuck Shaw. Here. District 3, Karen Brill. Here. District 4, Erica Whitfield. Here. District 5, Frank Barbieri.
Here.
District 6, Marcia Andrews. Here. District 7, Deborah Robinson.
All right, thank you. We have all 7 board members are present. Also in attendance today is the Superintendent, Dr. Donald Fenoy, and General Counsel Julianne Rico. Mr. Superintendent.
Yes, at this time I'd like to welcome our entire delegation of legislative affairs folks, and at this time I turn it over to Ed Tierney to introduce the rest of the team.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Board Chair Barbieri, Vice Chair Mr. Shaw, school board members, Dr. Fenoy. I'm very pleased this afternoon to be able to kick off the legislative update workshop. I'm joined today by Capital City's Ron LaFace and Megan Fay, Rita Solnit, and Kathy Villavicencio, our Broad resident. You'll remember on September 26th, there was a board retreat to start to formulate the legislative platform that would carry us into this legislative session. That platform was finalized on December 15th of 2018 and focused on student learning, finance, teacher pay, recruitment and retention, safety and mental health, facilities, and charter schools. And that platform carried us into the legislative session that started on March 5th and went on for 61 days. I'm not going to spend a lot of time recapping the session, frankly, because I don't think our memories need much refreshing. It was an intense, fast-paced session that had direct ties to Palm Beach County, and I feel obligated to point out that the leadership that this board provided to the staff, to the community, to the county, set the stage for protecting voter rights and made the jobs of the people sitting at this table trying to carry out and execute the legislative platform that much easier. And one last point before I turn it over to Capital City is the people at this table really worked tirelessly for our voters as well, more behind the scenes, but regularly up until midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning on the weekends. So I thank them for their efforts and turn it over now to Ron.
Thank you very much, Ed. I couldn't have said it any better than his opening. It truly was one of the more high-stakes sessions that I've worked in for the school district, but I'm happy to report that I feel we had a lot of success. So let me begin by saying good afternoon to everybody, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Both Megan and I are here just to give you an update on some issues that you all had identified as priorities for the board for us to engage in and try to influence. I do know that obviously Mr. Burke gave a budget presentation back in May, which was closer to the end of session, and during that also covered some of the legislation. So I'm going to try very hard not to be redundant and also move through so that there can be some time at the end if anybody has any comments or any additional questions. We were given about 30 minutes to run through this, so we will do it as swiftly as possible. But like I said, I am happy to report that I believe we came out of session with wins on issues that we identified as priorities. First, let me start out with safety and mental health, a big issue with a $68 million increase to this line item. But more importantly than the money, they did change the way that money is allocated to districts. Previously, it had been based almost completely on the crime index. This year, they've changed the allocation so that it's more weighted towards student population, with 2/3 there, 1/3 on crime index. That obviously helps Palm Beach because we have a lot of students here, and the actual crime index is going down in Palm Beach. So that gave us a nice little addition. In addition to the money, that the extra money they put in there, our allocation increased as well. And that's really just that's the way that this money should be distributed. The reason that it wasn't in the past was because we weren't so much focused on security of schools. We were more focused with keeping kids off the street, now the focus is on security in schools, and so that's why it's moving to the student population count. There's also $50 million for school hardening grants, similar to last session. There was more money last session, but this is a continuation of that grant program where we will be finding things that we can request that the funds be spent on and get a portion of that, and also $18 million increase for mental health funding. On finance, Mr. Burke certainly covered this in a very detailed fashion as it relates to the school district, but the important high-level issues that we have talked about are particularly around the required local effort, or the RLE. The Senate was able to convince the House again this year to take just the new construction component, because the House's position has been they want to roll back the rate completely, and so that we're not taking advantage of any property tax value increase. The Senate really fought for that and was able to again convince the House to take in the value increase from new construction. But also the biggest, I would say, takeaway this session was the base student allocation increase of $75. We do owe that again to the Senate. Their initial position was a $150 increase, and we settled on $75, which was much more than the House had wanted to put into the base student allocation. So we take that as positive and ask the Senate to continue their efforts. Probably the most important legislative issue to district operations that we've been working on, and I know that you all have been a part of this from the beginning, relates to facilities. We spent the past year with the 3 new facilities that we wanted to build, working with the department on trying to obtain approval, ultimately obtained approval for 2 of the 3. And because of that work that Megan and I had put into it with the district, we were kind of designated as the lead for all of the school district lobbyists on this issue, because we had been living it with you all for a year. I am happy to report that where this legislation ended up was actually farther than I thought we would be able to achieve. We've essentially removed the department oversight of approving new facilities when we're using local funds. So that 3rd school that we were not able to get approved, we are now, the district I know is working on plans for that school. But also more importantly, once you get past the EPS survey, the second component of that is being able to build the school within what was called the cost per student station caps. The big criticism of that is that even if we get a school approved, the caps do not really relate to the cost of construction these days, and what you can actually build once you have the approval doesn't look like what anybody thinks a school is. Those calculations have been off for years, but as a part of this legislation, we removed the cost per student station caps if we're building the facility using the COPS bonding program, which is how Palm Beach builds facilities. So for those schools, those cost per student station caps will not apply. We can build the schools that we would like to build, but then also because there are other ways to fund schools through state funding if they ever start to provide that, the legislation also calls for this cost per student station caps to be recalculated, and so in the future they will actually track the cost of construction. So I would say we righted the ability for schools to build facilities as they would like, but also there continues to be some accountability provisions, and so I hope that we're able to move past and do what we want to do on those issues. Going into teacher pay, the Best and Brightest bonus program is still here. It is the program that has been around. However, we did eliminate it being tied to the SAT, ACT, which has been the big criticism of the bonus program in the past. And this year, they've established 3 different types of bonuses, which the first one is the recruitment bonus, which is for new teachers in high-demand subjects. Second is the retention bonus for highly effective and effective teachers in schools that have improved 3 points over 3 years. And then the third type is a recognition bonus, which is for highly effective teachers identified by the principal under criteria that the school board identifies. There still is going to be a lot of rulemaking on this program. I actually heard Jacob Oliva, who's the chancellor of K through 12, speak about this last week and was asking for guidance about which pots of money for which of the the three buckets that we have here, how that would be best implemented. And I asked for recommendations from the district, and so I know the superintendent was a part of those discussions, and we will keep the board apprised as they figure that out. The fourth type of bonus is a principal's bonus as well. If a principal was at a school for 4 years and the school increases 3 points in the past 3 years, they would be eligible for that bonus. As it relates to charter schools, there really was not that much legislation this year that was enacted. There were a number of bills about charter schools. The majority of them failed. We'll talk about them at the end of the presentation, where I talk about bills that did not pass. But the most important piece on charter schools that I would like to point out to the board is the Schools of Hope. They were there, which was enacted, I think, 2 years ago. There were certain locations where Schools of Hope were eligible. If an operator wanted to open one, they did expand that to where they can go in more places. Under the new legislation, they can go in economic opportunity zones, and then they also revised what is defined as a low-performing school, and that designation is just so that a School of Hope could open up in the service area, and they made that more broad, so more schools would be considered low-performing schools, so that a School of Hope could open in the area. But it remains to be seen, who it will be opening up a School of Hope and where, if that is to occur. And then the final issue on student learning was the Principal Autonomy Pilot Program. There was legislation to expand that. It's a program that we take advantage of, but that legislation did not pass. Now to our two appropriations projects, which we spent quite a bit of time working on. I am happy to report, and as you all know, both of them were funded. I would like to point out that as far as school districts receiving direct appropriations, there's probably a handful of school districts that receive an appropriation. We are very unique for receiving two, so I commend you guys and your work for doing that. Certainly, Senator Powell, Representative Jaquette, and Senator Rader and Representative Polsky did a lot to try to move these projects along, and we have since been working with the governor's office during his review to answer any questions. I also would like to point out that Ms. Solnit has done a great job on providing letters of recommendation for the West Tech project, and then certainly Ms. Robinson has done a great job of showing community support for the historic Roosevelt High appropriation. We've had many conversations with the governor's office and policy of budget, as well as their executive plaza level staff. We've answered a lot of questions about these appropriations. They are, under review by the governor. We're not quite sure what he's going to do. His staff's not quite sure how he's going to handle projects. One of the things that we did do with these projects is the historic Roosevelt High School project is in the Department of State's budget. They have a cultural museum line item, so we put that one in there. And the West Tech College appropriation is in the higher ed budget. So we've tried to spread them out so it doesn't look like we have two next to each other. But we do think that they're both very valid projects. And like I said, we have received assurances that we've answered all of the questions and justified the projects to the governor's office. But how he handles local projects like this remains to be seen. And so we will have a better sense once he signs the budgets. This year, a lot of the education issues that I have already talked about were components of a large piece of legislation called Senate Bill 7070. You all know and have lived for the last couple of years. Instead of having 15 or 20 education bills, they just lump it all into one big bill and move it through the process. A big criticism of that in the past has always been that it's all negotiated behind the scenes, presented to the legislature as a take it and leave it, and everybody kind of has to choke down stuff they don't like to get something that they like. I will say this year that process was done very differently. Senate Bill 7070, everybody knew it was going to be the education package. It was filed, vetted through all committees. Members had opportunities to amend, to vote no, to make comments, and there were a lot of issues that were changed as it evolved through the legislature. So this was a much more open process than we've had in the past, and I do think that hopefully if we're going to continue to do these omnibus education packages, that we use the model from 7070 rather than the model from 7055 or 7069, some of these other bills that make people shudder when you say their names because they continue to be under litigation. But obviously, one of the bigger issues in 7070 was the establishment of the Family Empowerment Scholarship, which is a full-blown voucher program in the FEFP. It will fund 18,000 students, which was thought to be the wait list of students looking for vouchers under the current system. In order to qualify, you have to be 260% of the federal poverty level, which for a family of four is about $70,000 in income. If you are under that, then you would qualify. The only requirement on private schools in order to really take the voucher is that it has to test voucher students in grades 3 through 10 by either a nationally norm-referenced exam or the Florida Standards Assessment. The next issue is Best and Brightest. We've already pretty much covered that. Now on teacher certification, I do think that there's some very positive issues that were resolved in 7070 on that issue, at least to help teachers through the certification process. The first is a teacher gets a temporary certificate for 3 years. Previously, they only had 1 year to pass the general knowledge exam. We've expanded that to 3 years now, so to give them a little extra time to try to do it. But then also the bill directed the Department of Education to reduce the fees associated with the assessment and the certification application. And the department actually didn't even wait for Senate Bill 7070 to be filed. They've already initiated rulemaking and started those fee reductions immediately. And we're hoping some more to come on helping at least the certification process to run a little bit smoother for the teacher shortage. We've covered the two facilities issues early on. I do want to point out a new grant program called the Communities in School Grant Program. There was some funding associated with this, but this is basically for schools that are in turnaround or exiting turnaround. A grant program has been established if you implement this Community in Schools program to help with wraparound services, after school, extended day, different ideas to try. We in Palm Beach have a very similar program called Purpose-Built Schools. They are not the same. They are, to me, in reviewing them both, they just kind of look like different branded programs. I think Purpose-Built Schools was a better fit for the community down here because it also brings in the housing component of it, which Communities in Schools didn't really focus on. So it remains to be seen if this is something the district would want to look into, since we are already working on the Purpose-Built Schools program, and if this Community in Schools program continues to receive funding in future years. It was kind of an idea that was pushed by the University of Central Florida. They're the ones administering this grant program, but I did want to point that out, that it's similar to something we're doing here, but we have gone on a separate track than this. The other issue on turnaround that I also want to point out, and I spoke with Mr. Oswald before, and just to make sure that he thought that this was as important to our turnaround schools as I did, is they've created a new turnaround categorical, which is extra funding that's specifically geared towards turnaround schools or schools that are just coming out of turnaround, that you can fund up to $500 per student to provide these extra, supplemental wraparound services to help the school. So before this program, we had 25 district schools of hope, which was basically what this program has now replaced. You'll recall Palm Beach had 2 of those designated schools of hope. We received extra funding. We've collected all of the grant funding for those programs, but it was felt that was helping a lot, but it was not serving the whole community and all of the turnaround schools, because statewide there could only be 25 district-run schools of hope. And so you were only serving 25 schools statewide. I mean, look, we had 2 in Palm Beach. So in its place, they've created a categorical where you can spread this money around to your turnaround schools however you see fit. We do think that it's probably a better way to provide services here, but I will say that Palm Beach is kind of unique where we've received the benefit of both programs. And so we got the 2 schools that we were really focused on as 2 of the 25 schools. And now we're able to come back in with funding that we have a lot more flexibility in how we use to help those schools not only come out of turnaround, but also once they're out, we can continue to use this funding to maintain them and make sure that they don't turn back. So the next 2 slides are around Senate Bill 7030, which was the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Commission Act. It implements its intent was to implement the recommendations. You all can see from the bullet points some things that we've pulled out of that bill just to make you aware. I do know that there is an agenda item tonight on implementing some of the legal requirements, so I'm not going to go through any of these provisions. Just wanted to point them out to you, and if you have any questions, I'm sure Julianne will be able to answer those. The last bill that I want to talk about on a whole is House Bill 7123, which is the tax package that was passed last session. Each year, the legislature has a tax package. Usually it's all tax reductions. This year, as everybody is very, very aware of, it included a issue related to referendum millage for school districts. I've got to say that when that bill came out and it had the effect that it did on Palm Beach's referendum, the ability or the way that this community came together, not only from the delegation, from the school district, but just the community as a whole, was pretty amazing. I mean, I've seen it up in Tallahassee, but I've never seen all entities for Palm Beach work together like they did. I mean, from the working the hallways, being in committee testifying, to the legislators running amendments to put it more in line with what Palm Beach referendum said, and the testimony on the floor in both chambers. It was pretty amazing. As you know, the ultimate result of that was school districts will be sharing referendum millage with charter schools. But it's not until referendums that are approved after July 2019, so referendums like Palm Beach's, which is currently in effect for another 3.5 years, is unaffected until that time, which was critical because a lot of funding decisions for that referendum had already been made and would have to be opened up and redone. Since that issue took up most of, I would say it took up 90% of the discussion, 95% of the discussion of that bill. There was another, $20 million, $50 million in tax cuts in the bill that nobody ever talked about. But I do want to point out that the back-to-school sales tax holiday was in the bill, and it's August 2nd through the 6th. And so, the district does make sure that parents are aware of that. Megan, you want to?
Absolutely.
About the workforce.
So the next bill we wanted to discuss is House Bill 7071, which is workforce education. As many of you are aware, workforce education was a big topic in the legislature this session and was a priority of Governor DeSantis. So the bill, it does several things, but it creates a career and technical education pathway to a high school diploma. So essentially what it does is it allows approved industry certifications that have to be approved by the State Board of Education to substitute for either math credit or 2 science credits. The only courses that they cannot substitute for in the high school diploma are Algebra 1 Geometry or Biology 1, but they can substitute for other credits towards graduation. Another thing that the bill put into effect was making it easier for students to substitute a computer science course for a math or a science credit. Current law requires a student who completes a computer science course to actually get an industry certification for it to count as a high school credit. That takes away that requirement and really just makes it completion of the course to substitute, giving students a little bit of flexibility there too towards their high school graduation requirements. The bill also establishes the SAIL program, which I think many of you are probably familiar with the Rise to 55 initiative that the Florida college system has been pushing for a couple of years now, but it creates it in law. It's essentially an initiative encouraging the State Board of Education to work with the Board of Governors for the university system to ensure that, I guess they're going to work towards a goal of Florida's workforce having adults in Florida's workforce having post-secondary education, industry certifications, or post-secondary training at a level of 60% by the year 2030. And so as part of that goal, there is going to be some focus at the high school level on increasing the number of students who are in high school who are applying for post-secondary education. And also, I think there's going to be a push from the State Board of Education to making sure that high schools are informing students about financial aid for higher education, like FAFSA and other availability, to make sure that students who are low income know about opportunities that they may have for post-secondary education. The bill also creates a grant program. The bill focuses on grants for apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs, and provides $10 million that DOE will administer, but high schools will actually be able to apply for grants through the department to support existing programs and to expand new programs. So that'll be something that the district will be eligible to apply for, and the department will be administering after July 1st. Along the lines of what Ron had discussed earlier as far as teacher certification, this bill actually makes some changes, loosening some restrictions on adjunct teaching certificates, and it actually allows school boards to approve 3-year teaching certificates for adjunct teachers and allows them to teach full-time within the district. So currently they're only allowed to teach part-time. So it's another way to help alleviate the teacher shortage and retention issues that I know a lot of the districts throughout the state, including Palm Beach, are facing. The bill also changes the financial literacy requirements. So starting July 1st, all districts will be required to offer a half-credit elective in financial literacy. So it's not a required course for students to take, but it is a required course for all high schools to offer starting this coming school year. And this was a big priority of the late Senator Dorothy Huckel, some legislation that she had run several years in a row and unfortunately had passed, but after her passing, the legislature did put this into law, and so it was an important thing for the Florida Senate this year. And the last but not least, the bill implements some of the provisions in one of the governor's executive orders that he did back before the start of session, asking the Department of Education, in collaboration with stakeholders, including school districts, to review the career and technical course offerings that are approved by the department, and to make sure that they're really aligned with workforce demands, and making sure that they're aligned with middle and high wage jobs. So I'd be on the lookout for communications from the department this year as part of that review. And that completes workforce education.
All right. Thank you, Megan.
No problem.
Okay, so the FEFP overview, you all have had the presentation again by Mr. Burke, where he has drilled this down onto exactly how it impacts Palm Beach School District. The one thing that I did not see in his presentation that I want to make sure is on everybody's radar screen is, while there is no change this year to the DCD or the district cost differential, there is legislation that forecasts a future change. And I actually requires some between-session work on a possible change from the amenities way that the DCD is calculated to a wage-based index. This is the DCD, as you all know, is a component of the funding formula that tries to put more money in areas that it costs more money to live in. Obviously, Palm Beach is at the very top of that list, so any potential change to the DCD piques our interest, to say the least, and is also something that we absolutely will be involved in and will be watching very quickly. There's nothing more that can move money in the millions of dollars between districts than changes on the DCD. And I like to when somebody asks me what it's like when the DCD is on the radar screen, I was a part of I think it was the 2010 session, the last time they changed it, and it reminded me a lot of the opening of the Hunger Games. because literally everybody's looking at each other. Nobody knows who's their friend, and nobody knows who's out to get them. And the only way that you do know is when they publish runs, as they make little tweaks to it, and then you see, whose team everybody's on. So want to put that at the forefront. The legislation was much different than the last time we had a DCD change, where it was just done and flopped out as a deal from the legislature. This time it actually asked for the state's economic and demographic research arm to do separate runs, have meetings, take solicitation and input from school districts, and if any school district is negatively implemented, make recommendations on how to make them whole or provide glide paths. With that said, it's something that is unknown and that we are watching very closely, and we'll be talking about a heck of a lot more, and I'm sure we'll be at the top of our list for next year's agenda. So quick overview of a couple of other bills that weren't a part of 7070 that are of interest. House Bill 5 requires all discretionary sales surge tax referendums to be held at general elections going forward on or after January 2020. Senate Bill 7012 basically is an act relating to vaping that basically says any vaping shall be treated like tobacco as far as school disciplinary perspectives. Let's see, Senate Bill 292 is a bill that prohibits a school district from preventing the lawful wearing of a military dress uniform at a graduation ceremony. Senate Bill 7041 adds religion to the protective class of discrimination and also defines anti-Semitism. House Bill 807 is basically a civics material review bill. It asks the commissioner to look at all of the materials, whether adopted or not adopted in civics, and and make recommendations for gaps, as well as if he finds inaccuracies in adopted materials, require them to be changed. And then House Bill 7125 requires the disclosure of any arrest for unlawful possession or discharge of a weapon at a school-sponsored function or school property to be put forward on a job application if you're going to work in education, even if it's been expunged. One bill that is an oldie, but is something that I think is important for us to flag before you is House Bill 1279 from the 2018 session. You might recall from last year there was a transparency and fiscal accountability bill that was enacted after when the decision was made to enact this, we pushed back as far as making it effective in 2018 because there's a lot of components to it. There's a lot that district personnel, as far as financial reporting, needed to get their hands around, and the financial officers spend some time talking about how they were doing it. So the effective date was delayed until July 2019. Like I said, this was passed in the 2018 session, but since it's coming live soon, figured that we would just briefly go over it again. It does have some school board implications. It does require prior approval of travel by school board members outside of the district, just to make sure that it's legitimate school district travel. Align school board member salaries at the beginning, teacher salaries, prohibits the superintendent from or school board members from employing a relative or having somebody directly report to them that's a relative. An internal auditor is needed for districts over 500 million. Like I said, does require some financial reporting, which also has to be shown in graphical form. Any budget amendments have to be approved by the board and explained, and the superintendent is prohibited from lobbying the school board for 2 years. And then the DOE is supposed to develop a web-based tool to help people see what's actually being spent in the classroom, and that'll probably get developed sometime around 2030. Legislation that failed. This is always the fun list because this year we actually have some items in there that we opposed. So I'm happy to just run over these. Obviously, they're retroactively sharing our voted millage with charter schools, which was not what our referendum question said. That issue failed. School board term limits failed. There was an effort to increase dual enrollment by lowering the GPA. That failed. And then there were two bills relating to charter schools. One would allow state colleges and universities to be charter school sponsors. That was not enacted. And then another bill which would allow the state to be the authorizer of high-performing charter schools as well as schools of hope instead of the district, and that would be including replications as well, and that bill failed. We do expect both of those bills to be back next year. So looking ahead, I know we've gone a little bit over, so I apologize for that, but as you all know, the governor he's acted on a lot of the education bills. He has the budget. That's the biggest thing we're waiting on. We understand, at least from this afternoon, and we've heard from the district, the governor is working on a state tour next week about the budget, so we expect budget action imminently. What usually happens is the governor will sign the budget in Tallahassee, do the veto list, and then do a multi-state tour where they talk about some of the great things that are being funded in this year's budget, and that we expect that to occur next week. The State Board of Education and the department is constantly coming out with guidance as well as some rulemaking implementing some of these provisions, and we're hoping to work with them a lot more, particularly on the school security pieces, so we'll be monitoring that. We anticipate working on our next year's. I know it seems like we're just giving the report from this year, but the good news is the 2020 session is an early session. Starts in January, which pushes everything back. We will start our interim committee meetings in September, which means that we will be working for the next 2 months on coming up with our 2020 legislative platform to workshop and come before the board in late summer, early fall, so that we can have it ready to go before the committee meetings begin. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the time, and I turn it back over to you for any questions or discussion.
Thank you. Ms. Brill?
Thank you. So I just want to start off by saying that I think we have the best legislative team. It has really worked its way to just be a fabulous effort together. And I do want to mention that effort that you saw on House Bill 7123, the pulling together of all the resources in Palm Beach County, I have to say we have Ms. Solnit to thank for really working the community, pulling them together. I don't think it would have happened, the reaction from our community, the way it did without her efforts and boots on the ground. So having you up there, the two of you, Megan and Ron, and then having Rita down here, for me, it's been fantastic because we have our local person working and helping to mold legislation along with you. So thank you. I do want to mention that, I know you brought up the educational plant survey and the cost per student station. You know that when I was up in Tallahassee, that was my main focus because, my area is very heavily hit by the lack of ability to build schools. We're building out west. We have no schools. You hear me talk all the time on the dais that I only have one high school, and it's because we haven't been able to build out west. So much to my surprise at Cobra this morning, the new president brought up the new middle school and how excited the community is. We have been talking about this for over 9 years. We've had the land for, I think, 10 plus years, if not longer. And Somerset Canyon Charter was built about 9 years ago because we couldn't build. So when I met with the superintendent last week, I did ask him what we can do is, can we expedite the building now of this school? Because Mr. Burke had presented to us how we're increasing in the number of students, but the numbers are increasing on the charter school side, that we're maintaining a relatively flat growth. And in my area, those students are going to the charter schools. We're building new developments along the Western Corridor, and if we don't have this school built, I'm afraid we're going to keep losing those students to the charter schools. So when I did speak with Dr. Fenoy, I asked him, what do we need to do to explore moving it up? And he asked me to bring it up with my colleagues just to get a nod of heads, asking, for him and staff to explore what it would take to move it up from 2023. So I'm using this opportunity to just see if all of you will nod your head to explore the possibility of getting that school by Sunset Palms built sooner than out 2023 or later. So if you
I
all
believe
agree.
the superintendent indicated that Mr. Burke is working on the capital plan and it's being included in the capital plan.
Thank you, but I was told last week by the superintendent that I need to have all of you nod your heads in agreement to move it up from 2023. And so it was going to be on the agenda for next month, but since the opportunity has presented itself, I'm going to embrace it.
Well, so Ms. Brill, you're correct, and I think, but we are, as some latest developments, Mike Burke and Wanda Paul we are moving a lot of this work forward. We will be presenting the capital plan with new dates for several projects to the entire board really soon. So we are taking advantage of this opportunity.
So as a follow-up, then I take it that you will be exploring that opportunity for moving it up earlier on the schedule so that we don't have in July 100 COBRA members sitting out in the audience.
Yes, ma'am. We will definitely be working to get all of the what we're calling special projects contracts in as soon as possible.
Other questions? Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you, and I must say that I think we have a great team. I appreciate Capital City Consultants and with Mrs. Solnett on the team this year, and certainly looking at the whole team sitting here, we got a lot of work done. And I just tell you, just coming back from the Florida School Boards Association, and we're all working on the same issues. I mean, even though we have our own priorities in Palm Beach County, when we look at the big umbrella of pictures, we're all talking about many of the same things. And as I saw our team right there in Tampa last week, getting it done with the priorities, getting ready for next year. We're hoping that we do get a positive signature from the governor on our two appropriations, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. We know that we have worked hard, and we understand the last leg of the trip is now in the governor's hands. So I really do appreciate all of your hard work, and I can say, being your legislative rep for the school district and attending Florida School Boards Association, Mr. LaFace and your team, you've been here with us for a long time. And when we lost Mr. Crawford, there was a little break in that. But now we are sealed. We are tight. People know us. I mean, they know us from the Florida School Board, lobbying issues with all of the state people. We've been in Tallahassee with everybody. The legislators know us. Our local delegation know that we have it on the map. We're getting things done, and it's to be seen by the wonderful progress we made this year. So I can't say thank you enough to all of you sitting here under our leadership of our Chief of Staff. You're making it happen. So thank you so much. Now, I want to say there was one on here about this grant for communities in schools. Now, you know, we have a Communities in Schools program right here in Palm Beach County. So I'm just looking at that grant and how would that differ if we have a better opportunity of getting that money since we already have a program here, or is it something totally different?
And what you've, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay. Sure. What you've identified is something that I identified as well as soon as we saw this grant program come out. Unfortunately, I was told that the Communities in Schools program that we have here is different from the branded Communities in School grant program. They are separate entities. They happen to have overlapping titles, but it is a separate entity from the state grant program. But this Community in Schools grant program, they all provide very similar services, very similar to our purpose-built communities as well. And there is, like I said, it's being administered through the University of Central Florida. So I know the district is taking a look at this, seeing how it aligns with efforts that we are already trying, and if it's something that we feel that we also want to embark on, or whether we want to focus on the direction that we've already taken. Those decisions have yet to be made, but to your exact question, that Community in School program is a different program than the Community in School state newly adopted grant program.
And I do know that it is, but because we have one here, and if we apply for this, that hopefully will maybe give us a little bit of an edge. So that's what I was thinking, you know, as we kind of work through that whole process. Because, I mean, the after-school pieces, the counseling pieces, the extended school day, all of that, some of that is kind of in our program. So hopefully if we apply for this, and we will, we can talk about how we can expand some of the things that we're doing. So that was very exciting. And the second part, I was meeting with Mr. Oswald on yesterday about the Schools of Hope and the realignment of that money. That's a big deal. So I want you all to know with our schools and the Glades region how we have actually worked with our Schools of Hope, working with our deputy superintendent and looking at that money. Now we see a whole different picture where we can actually help more students, and we can actually put programs in for a longer period of time so that we won't have regression. Sometimes, you know, when you get off the list and then all of a sudden everything stops, you go back. So this hopefully will help us improve the ability to continue to move forward with academic achievement in those schools who have been identified as schools of hope. So I thought that was really good. Plus, there's so much good in here, so thank you so very much.
Any other? Dr. Robinson?
So I want to add my thanks to our team. There is nothing I like about Tallahassee except FAMU, I'm gonna just tell you. So thank God for y'all going there and fighting a good fight for us, and for the school board members who take on that fight, I applaud you. It sickens me, to be honest with you, but that's another thing. So I also hope that that our ears have perked up on these grants, communities and schools, as well as the high school CTE grants, because we need to go get that money. I want to just address the comments about purpose-built, though, because I know about purpose-built, but I don't know that this board has ever discussed purpose-built as a collective. My view and understanding of purpose-built is different than my view and understanding of communities and schools, but it just, my alarms went off that it appears that our lobbyist is talking about purpose-built. So it appears as though there's been some official embracing by this school district of purpose-built, and we have not had that conversation. And I think that we need to have that conversation, because I have some concerns about the difference between the model and what is happening in reality in my zip code, right? And so if this school district is going to talk about participate in purpose-built, I think this board needs to have that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McQuinn?
Totally agreeing with Dr. Robinson. Prior to winter break a year ago, so not whatever year, a year ago, individual board members were asked to speak. This is when Dr. Vosa was our superintendent. We were asked to speak with, work with me on this. It'll come. Rachel Dosical and our, please work with me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank goodness I have somebody in my ear here. Our Education Foundation. And they met with each of us, and it was nothing more, it was simply to explain to each of us individually what the vision there was of purpose-driven communities, but then nothing ever came to the board about that. We were told it would eventually be coming, so it was like an education meeting, and that never happened, so I certainly think we need that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think since Dr. Vosa's time, that group has been working more with other entities, and we've been participating and listening, but we have not fully signed any contracts, anything of that nature. However, I do think it's time for us to ask that group to come forward and present to the board on what the larger conversation is, and then for us to figure out how we fit into the larger work around purpose-built communities. I think what Ron is speaking to, this purpose-built community effort is taking place all over the state of Florida. I think Orlando, by the Citrus Bowl, they have done some redevelopment work with Orange Center. There's one in Tallahassee. I think there's some on the West Coast. So it's definitely a statewide initiative, which is why I think we're seeing money put in the legislature for it. But it's time for us to bring that group forward to see what it looks like here in Palm Beach County.
Thank you. Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you. Many of us work with education advisory committees, and many of you sitting right here speak at them. We have one in my area at Royal Palm Beach, Wellington, the Tri-Cities of the Glades. And you've been working with them throughout the whole legislative process. Now that we've gotten to this final conclusion, is it possible for someone from staff to work with the advisory boards in these cities and villages and get this PowerPoint on their website or somewhere for them to put it up? Because parents, community people, you did go back and talk about some of the issues, but many of these things came to closure after school was out. So if we can get this out, especially in my region, and maybe others have educational advisory committee boards, COBRA or something like that, this would be an ideal thing to put out there for the current information, because we're going to start right back up again. So we can look at this and say where we are, but we're going to begin the whole process in a few months. So this is a closure for us, if somebody could do that through the superintendent to the team out here.
Mr. Tierney will take care of that.
Okay.
Any other questions? So also, I want to thank all of you, especially you, Ron and Rita, for listening to me rant and rave and take out my frustrations about what was going on in Tallahassee on you guys, and you listened patiently, and then you obviously got the job done on a lot of this stuff. So I appreciate all the time that you spent with me on the phone, Ron and Rita, meetings, and listening to me kind of blame you because things weren't getting done, but you got them done anyway. So thank you all for the hard work. We really appreciate it.
You're an excellent motivator, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, if we have we'll adjourn the workshop, and we'll now call the attorney-client session to order.